Hello, church, and welcome to my dad's study. Out of town doing some stuff at my mom's house, and I thought I'd go ahead and record my Sunday school lesson from a little bit different perspective. But right here in this study, spent many an hour talking with my dad, talking Bible stuff, talking school stuff over the years. There's still some notes up on the chalkboard to my left, and even on the dry erase board right behind me. Lots of memories in this very room. Even as we've been cleaning these rooms out and joking and laughing, it's been a good time. But I wanted to get my Sunday school lesson done on time because I know some of you listen to it even before you come to church, which I appreciate. But also for everybody else that maybe wants to get this lesson done early in preparation for Sunday. As always, I want to encourage you to read the verses between, especially as we're going through Job. We were in chapter 1 last week, but we're in chapter 14 this week. We have missed a ton of material between. If you're doing the reading, which I encourage, you should be through chapter 8 as of today, if today is Sunday for you. So again, a lot of reading with Job, but I think it's very important. Even as of today, we are in the first, at the end of the first cycle of speeches, where Job is talking back and forth with his friends Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar. It's basically a bunch of conversations. They're not very good friends, but friends nonetheless, who have come in and try to help him overcome these feelings he's having. Last week, remember, everything was taken away from Job. The devil had been allowed to challenge him, but he couldn't touch Job himself. Well, between that week and this week, if you've done your reading, you realize that now the devil's gone back and essentially in that second heavenly conversation, been given permission to even touch Job. He couldn't kill him, but he could touch him, and he got sores from head to toe. And his wife, his wonderful wife, just said, "Why don't you curse God and die?" Nicole, don't get any ideas. But he was basically at rock bottom, and so his three friends, Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, decided to come together and encourage him, not so much, and tell him, give him different pieces of advice. Eliphaz, he said, basically, I've never seen an innocent person suffer before. You must have done something wrong. That was his general advice through all the readings. Bildad said, God blesses the righteous and curses the wicked. So basically, you're a wicked person. And then Zophar says, you must be a hypocrite. You're acting one way and saying another thing. You must be a hypocrite. So really good friends, the kind of friends you really want around when you're suffering. So basically the rest of the book is, or until we get to God's conversation with him, is these friends talking back and forth and giving their horrible advice. And so chapter 14, we come to a place where Job is kind of on a roller coaster ride. He's at a point where he really wants to confront God. If you read, in fact, chapter 14 is in the middle of one of Job's responses. He starts in chapter 12 and it goes through chapter 14. At the end of chapter, or in chapter 12, he sounds like he's on a high. He wants to confront God. He feels like he has a good case. I want to defend the way that I've lived. And he sounds like, in fact, in chapter 13, I think it is. Yes, 13 says, my eyes have seen all this. My ears have heard and understood it. What you know, I know. Basically telling his friends, I know everything. I'm not inferior to you, but I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. Um, he's wanting to sit before the throne and say, hey, what's going on? But by the end of chapter 13 and into our Bible lesson, chapter 14, despair starts to set in. So again, this kind of roller coaster ride of just rock bottom. And I think again, Job is appropriate because a lot of us go through this ups and downs of life. And so we're at that point of despair in this argument. And I think we've been there. Your Sunday school lesson talks about, being on a team or you're watching your favorite team when you can see it when all hope, your team just kind of is deflated. Nobody likes to watch that. Nobody, especially when it's your team. Nobody likes to be there. You want to change the channel if it's a professional team or college team. Nobody wants to participate in that. Church, you don't want to be there when there's no hope. It's nobody. But just like in Job, there should never be a point where there's no hope, which is what we learned in this lesson today. But so many people want to give up, and like the team thing, they want to turn the TV off. It's like, I just can't watch this. Luckily, Job never gets that down. He gets really close, which we find out today, but he never gets that down. So a lot of background today because we skip so much, but let's see if we can get to the point where we get to this lesson here. So chapter 14, verses 1 through 6 to begin with. Let's see what we got. It says, mortals born of woman are of few days and full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away. Like fleeting shadows, they do not endure. Do you fix your eye on them? Will you bring them before your judgment? Who can bring what is pure from impure? No one. A person's days are determined. You have decreed the number of months. You have set limits he cannot exceed. So look away from him and let him alone, till he has put in his time like a hired laborer. At this point, again, at the end of chapter 13, going into 14, he is coming into this point of hopelessness, despair, however you want to say it. He wants to stop hurting, and in fact, he makes two requests of God in chapter 13, verse 21. It says, only grant me these two things in verse 20, God, and then I'll hide from you, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand from me and stop frightening me with your terrors. So if you'll do these two things, and then he has a ton of questions, and some of those questions are where we're at in chapter 14. He's basically saying mortals born of women, us human beings, our days are short. In fact, your Sunday school lesson says he gives two metaphors. I learned them as similes because he's using like. The original Hebrew has the word like, so he gives us two similes. One is of flowers and one of shadows. So if you're a human being, your life is like a flower in the fact that when you're born, you have potential. It's beautiful. There's everything is ahead of you. Things are wonderful. But by the time you get out in the sun, you're beaten down by the sun, and flowers really don't last that long. So in one respect, that is what life is like. And then secondly, life is like a fleeting shadows. Same verse 2. They don't endure. A shadow is here and gone. In fact, in one day, it's the whole cycle of the shadow is gone. Not to mention the fact, commentary doesn't bring this out, but I think this comparison is also good in the fact that shadows, nobody remembers a shadow. Not much of an imprint is left of a shadow, or no imprint at all. is left of a shadow. So there's both these similes. Job feels like, there's just not much to life. So you can see how this hopelessness, this despair it's showing through in his thought process. So out of that thought then comes some questions. And he kind of has this cycle throughout, thought, questions, and either a demand or a request. And you'll see that pattern. So there's the thought. Here's the questions. Do you fix your eyes on them? Meaning, do you focus on them? Why would you do this? If life is so short, why do you concentrate on them? Why do you cause more pain? Do you fix your eyes on them? Will you bring them before your judgment? If man has such a short lifespan, why do you throw more pain on top of them? And he's asking that about man, but he's also asking that about himself. Look, God, I've worked for you. I've done the right things. My life is short anyway, which we know is actually pretty long in our standards because he lived 140 years after everything was returned to him. But in regard to the bigger picture, life is short. Why are you going to heap more things on me? Why do you focus your eye upon me? In fact, I think the NASB put it better. It says, you also open your eyes on me, meaning you focus this on me as well. You put this pain on me as well. You will bring them before you. You judge me as well. And then the second question out of this, verse 4, who can bring what is pure from impure? In other words, he's admitting he's a sinner. What do you expect, God? We fail you. We're not pure beings. Don't you expect us to mess up? Why are you going to punish us for being impure beings? It's actually a pretty good question. Now, that's not a free license to do whatever you want to because we are impure beings. It's just saying this is what you get. This is what you expect. A person's days, and then those are the questions. And now here's almost an affirmation and an expectation. It says, a person's days are determined. You have decreed the number of these. God, I know who you are. I only have a certain number of days left, and you've set these limits. So here's my request. Why don't you turn the other cheek? So look away from him and let him alone till he has put in his time like a hired labor. So given man's life is so short, given that we already have pain and trouble and all these things, why are you going to punish us? We're already sinners. What's your expectations of us? God, just leave us alone. Didn't mean need. All right, sorry. If we get to a point where we're asking these kinds of questions, it's actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Because we're starting to realize how precious life is. He realized, maybe because he lost everything, maybe because he had the sores, maybe because he had all this pain, but he did realize how precious life was. It's not always a bad thing to ask questions like this. Job had the right to ask it. Now, making demands of God, I don't know how far you draw that line, but it's even okay that he said, God, can you just leave us alone? He's not being ugly about it. Many of us may have made that request before. God, I'm in enough pain. Leave me alone. He's recognizing that it's under the power of God. Remember, he has no idea of what's going on behind the scenes. He has no idea that Satan is actually the reason. He's not the all-powerful. Remember, God allowed this to happen. But Satan's the reason this is happening. God said, have you considered my servant Job? So Satan's being able to do this because God's allowing it, but he's not giving any authority, any power in these words to Satan. He's still saying, God, can you leave me alone? So in all of this, Satan's really not a part of the picture. And to that, I think we probably need to heed that advice, even though it's not advice, it's a thought. And recognizing that when we're going through pain, going through sorrow, trials and tribulations, of God, can you take this away? God, can you leave me alone? Recognizing that it's God's power and God's authority. Just a thought. Verse 7 through 12 is when he really hits rock bottom. Here he's asking questions. Here he's making demands, if you will. But 7 through 12 is when you can really tell that his emotions have really hit rock bottom. He makes a comparison. It says, at least there is hope for a tree. If it's cut down, it will sprout up again. And if its new roots will not fail. Its roots may grow old in the ground, and its stump die in the soil. Yet at the scent of water it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. But a man dies and is laid low. He breathes his last and is no more. As the water of a lake dries up, or a riverbed becomes parched and dry, so he lies down and does not rise. Till the heavens are no more, people will not awake or be roused from their sleep. At this point, he clearly says, I'm done. In fact, your Sunday school lesson calls this section despair. It's to me, that makes it sound even worse than hopelessness, because there's absolutely no way out in this place, because he's comparing a tree to a human being. He says at least a tree has hope. You cut a tree off and then it'll sprout back up. It'll come back to life. Even if the roots die, if there's even a hint of water, if there's even a hint of hope, it'll come back. So it's telling us that he doesn't even have a hint of hope. So he makes this comparison, and in that comparison, using that word "but," so it's a comparison, comparative conjunction. He's saying, I'm not like that tree. Worse, he's saying humans aren't like that tree. When we die, we die. We're more like that dried up lake, like that desert. There's no coming back. Now, we should know on this side of the cross that that's absolute hogwash. There is a coming back. But remember, he's on that side of the cross. In fact, he'll ask that question here in just a minute. But we should always have hope. That's the difference between a believer and a non-believer, that there is a coming back. So this comparison of the tree, actually we should be more like the tree. If we are cut down, if we are laid to rest, we should know that there is life. There is that hint of water, living water, as a matter of fact. So actually this believers are like the tree, non-believers are like the human in this analogy that he's given, this comparison that he's given. But he doesn't see it that way. He sees human beings as the lake that's dried up, parched, lying down, never to rise. And because of that, he has absolutely no hope. So again, you kind of see the roller coaster in his life, and he has none. Now, just a few verses ago, chapter 13, he was ready to confront God, show him how he had lived, and that still may be his attitude. He may be ready to confront God, but it's more of, I have nothing to lose. I may get shut down from God anyway, but there's no hope in where he's at right now. And again, I want to stress the fact that this should not be our attitude. If we're believers, we absolutely should be holding on to that hope in Christ Jesus. But again, he's on that side of the cross, and he wouldn't have known, he wouldn't have had that heart. Verse 13 to 14, though, he did have insight. He did have the right question to ask. In verse 13 and 14. If only you would hide me in the grave and conceal me till your anger has passed. If only you would set me a time and then remember me. If someone dies, will they live again? All the days of my hard service, I will wait for my renewal to come. So, some good stuff here. Even though he doesn't have much hope, even though he's on that side of the cross and doesn't know who Jesus is, he's obviously somebody that believes in God, has a knowledge of the potential of God's power, because he's asking an incredible question here in verse 14. I'll go back up to the other in just a second. If someone dies, will they live again? He's asking the right question to the right person, to the only one that has the answer to that question. So he doesn't get the answer, but at least he's asking it to the right person. It'd be like somebody coming up to you today and goes, you know, what happens after you die? Goes, well, let me tell you what this says. I'll tell you what I believe, but let me tell you what this says. You know, it's important that you go to the right authority to answer the question. And he says, it's worth the wait. And I'll wait for that day of renewal. I'll wait for that day of sprouting again, if you will. Like that tree. I'll have that hope. I just need to know if that's true. Does a person live again? And for us, it's the same. If I know that there is revival, resurrection, if I know that that is truth, I'm good. I'm good with whatever happens to me. I'm good with trials and tribulations. I'm good with those things. I can hold on to that hope knowing that there's something greater on the other side. Even with trials on this earth, if I know that, you're going for a surgery and you know without a shadow of doubt you're going to be better on the other side, you'll go through that pain, right? Well, if you know that there's a better life on the other side of glory, you can usually deal with whatever is on this. You know, I've seen people struggle with cancer, but if they're a believer, somehow they push through it, knowing that when they're completely healed spiritually on the other side, they deal with it in such a different way than those that don't believe. He was doing the same thing here. So that hopelessness that he had, that despair, seems to turn around a little bit in these verses. God, if you'll answer this question, this is pivotal, I'll be okay. Now, an interesting thing in verse 13, though, it says, if only you'll hide me in the grave, what they call Sheol in the Hebrew world. That it wasn't, like in the grave, like what we think grave here. They actually call it like a resting place. And that's why he says, if you'll hide me there for just a moment, but then remember me. It's almost like truly a hiding place, but then don't forget me. Come back and get me, and then raise me. That's why verse 14 is there. God put me in this grave, get over your anger, let things pass, and then don't forget me. Set a time to come back and get me, and then raise me. That is their version of resurrection. So in a sense, there is that belief of resurrection there. It is very similar in that respect to, okay, God, I'm going to die. I'm going to go in the grave. But that's a resting place for my body, because spiritually speaking, you're going to raise me. So nothing wrong with the belief that he had. He was just asking the question, is this true? Are you going to raise me? Because if it is, I can hang on. If it is, this is doable. And quite frankly, that's still true for us today. God, if you could just set me to the side whenever this anger for him or whenever this trial is over, remember me, raise me up, and put me into your presence. If this can really happen, I'm okay with it. There's almost a contentment being sounded off by Job in this point, and that gives him hope, and as well it should give us hope. Again, I hope Job is helping you. It's helping me, so I hope it helps you. Let me pray for us, and we'll be done. Father in heaven, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the privilege of reading through Job together. And I pray that it is touching someone's heart today as we travel this road together. Father, I continue to pray for those that can't come to church. That I pray that they are being kept safe by your strength and your encouragement each and every day. And I pray this in the mighty name of Christ Jesus. Amen. As always, everyone, you take care of yourself and hope to see you soon. God bless.